Comparative tests are a great way for us to get three competing models together in the same environment to see how they stack up directly against each other. And we've got three executive sedans for this comparative test.
Yes, of course, very important segment, not only from a consumer point of view, but also for the manufacturers. These cars are all volume sellers. We have a BMW 3 Series, we have a Mercedes-Benz C-Class, and the brand new Audi A4. And of course, all those cars either brand new, as we say, or recently refreshed. There are other contenders in this segment, like Jaguar's recently released XE, but we chose these three because they are far and away the most popular option amongst buyers. The three models going up against each other are the Mercedes-Benz C180, the latest generation of which was launched in 2014. Next up, Audi's brand new A4 1.4 TFSI. And finally, BMW's 318i, the oldest of the models on test. This 6th generation F30 was launched in 2012 and underwent a facelift last year.
You may have picked up on the fact that these cars aren't near the tops of their respective ranges. They are in fact all entry-level models. Our reasoning for choosing them is that they represent a more realistic choice in the marketplace, with affordability being a key concern for a lot of buyers these days.
This latest BMW 3 Series is a familiar sight on South African roads, and despite the fact that this is the facelifted model, it doesn't look that much different from its predecessor, which of course places it at a disadvantage compared to the other two cars here. It's still a handsome machine, and it's certainly the kind of car that a lot of people aspire to.
Out of the contenders on test, the 318i is arguably the safest looking of the lot, with BMW designers opting to keep a fairly familiar feel to previous generations. But it's still an up-to-date design and includes a number of features that buyers take for granted at the price, like LED running lights. The C-Class is arguably the standout member of the three because, unlike the BMW, it's not just a facelift, and unlike the A4, it doesn't look like a simple evolution of the previous generation. It's easily the most elegant of the lot, although from some angles it can look a little soft.
C-Class fans, of course, will say that the curves and rounded elements are stylish rather than soft, and we tend to agree. The C-Class carries the design ideas of bigger, more stately Mercedes-Benz models like the S-Class very convincingly, and it does offer something quite different in terms of appeal. The problem with creating a strong identity like Audi has is that your new cars all seem to look very similar, and although this is an all-new from-the-ground-up A4, it does look quite similar to the previous car. Having said that, if you start looking at the details, you'll see that this is a very crisp, very modern, very contemporary design, and it probably will look good for a long time to come too.
In this roundup, the A4 arguably looks the most athletic and certainly the most aggressive. Its collection of sharp lines and angles and a look that comes across as less bulky than the others gives it a fairly unique appeal. Being the newest design obviously gives it an advantage, but in styling terms, it's certainly not a runaway winner. When it comes to the interior, these cars have a lot in common in terms of the space, the quality of the materials, the ergonomics. All their infotainment systems, for example, are also screen-based, and they also have the ability to be spec'd beyond belief. This Audi, over 150,000 rands worth of options. That BMW, over 200,000 rands worth of options.
Having that amount of toys on hand obviously makes it a little more difficult to pick a favorite here, but we concentrated on the basic user experience and ignored things like the optional virtual cockpit instrument cluster in the Audi. That said, the A4 interior has a lot going for it. It has the most modern feel with a clean layout offering fewer buttons, while a lot of the car systems are controlled via MMI.
In the C-Class, much like the styling, there is a large dose of elegance and no small amount of influence from models higher up the Mercedes-Benz range. The ergonomics are spot on, and materials like gloss black plastic create a very upmarket feel, one that's almost unexpected in this class.
The BMW is the least surprising of the lot, possibly because of a combination of it being the oldest model here and the fact that its interior is filled with very familiar BMW fare. But it is a very user-friendly cabin with good comfort and a measure of style thanks to the two-tone design. As far as drivetrains are concerned, both the Mercedes-Benz and the Audi have four-cylinder turbocharged engines, but that's where the similarities end. The Audi has a 1.4-litre engine delivering 110 kilowatts of maximum power linked to 250 newton-meters of torque. The Merc, a 1600cc engine, also more powerful at 115 kilowatt, although the torque is the same at 250 newton-meters. The gearbox is also different. The Mercedes-Benz has a conventional automatic gearbox. The Audi benefits from a dual-clutch 7-speed gearbox. And I have to say that the gears themselves are better stacked and better arranged in the Audi than they are in the Merc. On the other hand, the Mercedes-Benz has a broader power band that comes in earlier, extends longer, and therefore makes for better tractability.
The C-Class has an average fuel consumption claim of 5.8 litres per 100 k's, while the A4 does even better at 4.9 litres on the combined cycle. For once, a car's CO2 count might actually be a consideration. 135 grams per kilometre incurs a tax of 1,700 rand for the Merc, but at 114 grams per kilometre, the A4 is exempt. The reason we've separated the 318i from the herd is because it does things a little bit differently. It packs a 3-cylinder turbo petrol motor, 1500cc with 100 kilowatts and 220 newton meters. It's matched to a very well sorted 8-speed Steptronic gearbox, which we feel would be even better if the 318i was fitted with shift paddles, which sadly aren't available in this model. At 5 litres per 100 k's for the combined cycle and 116 grams of CO2 per kilometre, the claimed consumption and emission figures are impressive. Now, how well do they drive?
I think the most impressive part of this vehicle for me is the ride refinement. It just feels like a much more upmarket, much smarter, much bigger car, in fact, than you'd expect.
Yeah, and I was very surprised to see how well it does against the 3 Series, which is kind of the benchmark of how good the drive is. For me, this car, at the very least, matches it. It really is incredibly well refined.
Refinement then, but not taking away some of the sportiness. I mean, in this market where you're also dealing with a slightly younger audience, the dynamic aspect is really important. And I think as much as the ride is smooth, when you do get into a set of twisties, the steering feels good, the car feels responsive. There's a nice neutral stance, none of that sort of hectic oversteer or understeer for that matter. And perhaps more importantly, despite the smaller engine, it feels quite peppy as well.
Yeah, it feels very capable. And I think for those people that enjoy their toys, it does help that this car is fitted with Audi's Drive Select, and it does have the optional shift paddles as well.
Yes, shift paddles really allow you to make the most of that S-tronic dual clutch gearbox, and the sort of ability to decide manually what you want just at the right time does make for a much more involving drive. So I think really a good all-rounder. The A4 impresses with its mix of dynamic capability and ride refinement and feels very much like it's been engineered to handle a lot more power, which makes us look forward to the performance versions of the model. For now though, and in more practical terms, the Audi is a very easy car to enjoy, offering good power matched to a top-class chassis and a level of involvement that belies its everyday commuter status.
For me, the C-Class kind of represents the most positive and the most negative of what we've got in these tests in terms of drivetrain. The 1600 motor, unsurprisingly, is the most powerful, but for me it feels like the most punchy of the lot as well.
Absolutely, yeah, and it certainly has that sort of broad power band that it has. Just makes the whole progress of the car much more effortless.
Yeah. On the downside though, the automatic gearbox does feel like a proper old school automatic. It doesn't feel as good as the BMWs, which is also an automatic, and of course doesn't feel as good as the dual clutch in the Audi.
And the problem of course is with that is that the BMW demonstrates that an autobox, a normal autobox, can be used very much like a DSG box, but somehow that doesn't seem that important in this context.
From a dynamic point of view, there really isn't too much wrong with the car either. I mean, comparatively, the steering probably doesn't feel as good, but it's not bad, and it's still quite an involving drive.
Yeah, exactly. And if you start putting this car through a set of twisties and give it a bit of stick, fun that it is a really composed, actually quite entertaining car.
That entertainment factor, combined with the fact that the 1600 motor feels the strongest overall, means that the C-Class is very much a contender. When it comes down to it, the only weak link in its makeup is that automatic gearbox, which deletes some refinement and can get in the way of outright performance.
The thing about getting into a BMW 3 Series is you know exactly what to expect, and that's especially true if you're the driver, because this cockpit is very much still driver focused.
It is, and there is that consideration or that concern when you get into a car with a 3-cylinder motor that it's probably not going to be as much fun, but surprisingly this car does deliver dynamically.
Absolutely. I mean, I do like that gruff 3-cylinder sound, which is typical of all those 3-cylinder motors, and it does go really well. I think, again, they've done a good job in terms of selecting the right gear ratios. There's nice bottom end punch, tractability is good, and of course then let's not forget the rest of the package, because BMW's always had a really strong reputation for good handling cars.
And this is a 3 Series, and it's underpinned by all those genes. It's got years and years of development, and it really is a dynamically very enjoyable car.
Yeah, so there we go. I suppose if you had to choose a highlight of the 3 Series, then the dynamic is certainly part of that. Typically BMW, the 318i delivers solid engineering and decades of development that translate into a very enjoyable drive. Being fitted with a 3-cylinder motor may make one think that it lacks ability and entertainment when pressing on, but the reality is that, with good turbo shove, a well-sorted gearbox and an excellent chassis, this most baby of the 3 Series range still delivers the goods. So we've looked at all the different facets of these 3 cars, and we've come to the conclusion that it's actually quite a close run race.
It is. They're all very good in their own respects, and there are some areas where one is stronger than the other, but let's take a look at them individually. The BMW 3 Series is a South African favorite, and for a long time it has been a sales leader. It's at a slight disadvantage in this group simply because it's not the newest version, it's just a facelift.
But it remains a favourite amongst drivers. The question is whether the Mercedes-Benz C-Class has got a similar appeal. Mercedes-Benz has been a bit of a fuddy-duddy brand, but it's worked very hard to broaden its appeal, especially to a younger audience. The C-Class has done exactly that, and it is a very handsome machine.
So with the Merc and the BM putting in unsurprisingly strong performances, where does that leave the A4? So from being the brand that had the most to prove in this class, I think in this shootout, the Audi A4 has come out tops.
Yes, I think anybody who gets to drive this car will certainly agree, especially if they know what the other cars are like. But of course, brand awareness and bias also comes into place. And for Audi, the most important thing of all will be whether this car sells as well as it should.
Our pick in the executive sedan class is the new Audi A4.
It may have the most modest power output, but the BMW 318i is certainly not underwhelming. Combined with a good 8-speed automatic gearbox and a typically entertaining 3 Series drive, it's still a difficult package to beat.
The Mercedes-Benz C-Class is arguably the most grown up of the lot. It packs a punchy 1600 motor and is dynamically impressive when given a chance, but it's let down to an extent by a less than perfect gearbox.
In truth, it's still a very tight competition though. All 3 cars offer their own mix of style, refinement, interior comfort and driving enjoyment. But for us, it's the Audi that has got the balance of all those elements just right.